Thanks very much, John. Yeah, great.
I hope that we have later discussion because I oppose so much the views of those guys that I hope I can say something about this. But I will be brief. Germany has a transfer union. It goes actually back to the year 1867. It's called Länderfinanzausgleich. Germany has a GDP of roughly $3.5 trillion. The Länderfinanzausgleich has a volume of probably 1% of GDP. It is financed by roughly 50% with surplus states in Germany, 3 of them, financing 13 other states. And it goes back to the German constitution. Because the German, so it gets revised last time, the original was 1995, but it basically says equal levels of living throughout Germany is the key, and then it's even defined in percentages, and that's the basis of this Länderfinanzausgleich. And this Länderfinanzausgleich is extremely politically difficult. So basically, when you look at it, Bavaria is currently the biggest payer, and they sue now. They received for 30 years, and now they sue. So what I'm saying is, even within a country like Germany, Michele was indirectly referring to that, we have a transfer mechanism that the thing works. And Italy has a similar problem when we look at Mezzo-Germany, for example. I will not discuss why we have in Europe a debt crisis. I will just say that we have a debt crisis. And the question is, how was the reaction function? The reaction function, I describe the German reaction function, and again, I'm positum, I'm not normative, I'm an economist, I don't feel. I'm just describing what I see. The Germans, I describe the following way. A guy walks by a pond. The Germans is the guy, and sees someone drowning in the pond. The person in the pond drowning is the Greeks, but you can call them the Portuguese if you prefer that. And what the Germans do is they help the person drowning, but put the hand under the chin, that the person can breathe. And the person says, "Excuse me, could you please help me and move me out of this pond?" And the German says, "No, I will not. It's your own mistake that you fell into it." That's what we have. Now, more technically speaking, is it a flow or is it a stock problem?
Did you say it was a choke on the no.
I didn't say that.
It was a choke.
Comes later. The Germans treat the crisis as a flow crisis. So basically, all the packages mainly provide liquidity to enable those countries to pay their interest payments. But it does not really address the fact that it is a stock crisis. And Istvan, it's not only a stock crisis in Greece, it is, of course, also a stock crisis in other countries. Now, I have prepared all those slides, but I have not brought my glasses with me, so I cannot read you what I have there. But, for example, it's a problem when you get blind. I just got blind the last 2 years. I've got used to that idea. So, Portugal has increasing debt levels. By the way, Ireland had an increasing debt level last year. Spain has an increasing debt level. Debt in Greece alone last year increased by 20%. By 20%. Is this sustainable? It's simple math. It's fifth graders math. On the left-hand side, you have your refinancing rate times the existing debt level. So for Greece, this is, make the math with me, 180%. Be super optimistic, 6% yield. That's the best I give you. So we're talking here about 180 times 6. Then we look on the right-hand side of the equation and see how can we solve that. Well, the first thing would be inflation. Which inflation? There is no inflation. We are very close to deflation, and there's no reason to believe that this will change the next years. On the right-hand side, we have real GDP growth. Potential output growth for those countries is, in all cases, below 2%. So now I ask you, how do you want to finance that? With a primary budget surplus of 12, 14, 16%?
Even worse.
Even worse than that, but you can see, because you can read. But it is not sustainable. So it is a stock crisis. Why are the Germans behaving that way? Well, look into history. If you look at the last 150 years, Greece got bailed out 5 times. 5 times. So what we get is a typical moral hazard problem where the Germans say, if we do it, if we admit, I think Merkel and their advisors know that it's a stock problem, but they don't want to admit it because they are so scared about the moral hazard issue of the side. Plus, politically in Germany, basically not doable. I would think that a German chancellor who tries now at the moment, what are we talking about? For Greece, we talk about a bailout that would be sustainable of probably, let's say 80 to 100 billion euros minimum, probably more. Probably more, when you think 180%, maybe 9% of GDP, we are close to 180 billion. That's the beef we are talking about only for Greece. So we are in a situation that the crisis is not over. We are in a situation where the debt levels are not sustainable, and it's only a question of time. You need only a spark that will then make it worse. The spark can be Ukraine, but the spark can be something else. So this is the situation. Now let me see what have they done.
You agree with Michele then?
Huh?
On that point you agree with Michele.
Yeah, but there's an accident. When I agree with Michele, that must be accidentally, not intentionally.
Those Venn diagrams sometimes get together with the goal.
So let me just look a little bit, what have they done? So clearly what I say, I agree with Michele, and I say fiscal union, you need a fiscal transfer mechanism. And you have to make it politically acceptable, or the monetary union will not survive. There's no doubt for me. And I agree, of course, with Michele here. Let me talk a little bit, because I have mentioned the constitution of Germany and the basis of this Länderfinanzausgleich.
When was it done, by the way? I couldn't hear.
The Länderfinanzausgleich goes back to Norddeutscher Bund, 1867, disappeared under Hitler, came back 1949,
So
was
before-
revised several times.
Before Germany was unified.
Yeah, goes back to the Norddeutscher Bund, 1867.
Thank you, sorry.
When we look at what is the news, so what have they done now? They want to improve now Europe. What have they done? It's the so-called banking union. Now let's take a look at the banking union, because the banking union and the German role in the banking union nicely tells you what the problems are. It comes again and again. First level of banking union, if I could read it, would be the single supervision mechanism. Single supervision mechanism is, okay, you have a set of rules that should be applied. Sounds easy, by the way, is not that easy as it seems when you talk with auditors about this problem, but it seems to be feasible.
First the stress.
Then comes single resolution. And the single resolution model is a total mess.
Yeah.
So they say a bank fails, now something quasi-automatical should kick in. And then they have procedures of a mixture. So the Germans don't want the Italians to decide if we close a German bank. I can understand it somehow, right? So there is a political struggle, it gets very complicated, and they can push it through. Why? Because if you really would do a firm process that hands it over to Brussels, it would violate the German constitution. It would not only violate the German constitution, it would violate the constitutions of many other member states. So in other words, when the European constitution attempt failed, a key element to achieve and move towards fiscal union and other elements as your regulation were basically jeopardized, to say it friendly. When you look further on those, banking union, the third is a fund. It's not a deposit insurance as we have in the United States. It's a fund. The fund should be paid, the banks pay in 55 billion until the year 2020. So it's nothing, okay? So obviously everyone knows it's nothing because they have bailed out banks for 1.8 trillion in the last 7 years, and still have problems. So 55 billion you can help the Commerzbank in its third bailout maybe, right? So it's insufficient. So what is the fourth element of the banking union? Fiscal backup. So basically to say, because the fund solution is insufficient, we need a fiscal backup, ultimately. And the Germans have a problem with that. Again, why? Do we really want, does it mean that the German taxpayer is indirectly guaranteeing Greek banks, guaranteeing Greek bank deposits, guaranteeing Portugal bank deposits, Italian bank deposits? And then we are exactly at the beginning. It was a mistake to create a monetary union without a fiscal union, and with every day of the crisis, it gets politically more difficult to put that in place. Thank you.
Thanks very much, all three of you. I have a few.
And I was shorter than you guys.
I have a few follow-up questions on these threads, but I thought maybe I want to throw it out to the audience to see if anybody has any questions or comments and reactions to what we've heard. Yeah.
I agree that the union is not sustainable in the long run, so I agree with the two gentlemen on the ends. Sorry, it's fine. But I couldn't follow your argument to the conclusion that you reached. But I think it's really unfortunate that when the currency unit was put in place initially, that they hitched the future of the EU to the future of the currency unit. It causes them a great deal of political stress to think about reversing course now. And I wonder if any of the gentlemen here would like care to comment, if they could see their way to finding some way out. What would you think about the French and Germans withdrawing from the Eurozone and creating their own currency? It would certainly simplify transaction costs. You wouldn't have to have, 15 or so different currencies, different exchange rates to deal with. What would you think about something like that?
It would be feasible, but you got the wrong country, France.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking.
But you could do Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Belgium,
Finland.
Luxembourg, Finland.
It seemed easier, it would be more feasible to do that than,
Because the numbers there suggest a relative degree of homogeneity. The problem with you, as it stands, is the diversity. It's just. Can I say something about this stuff about political union and all that? If you read the documents of the Maastricht Treaty, so before 1990, you really read the memoranda that the Minister of Finance of country X would write to them. You find that, first of all, they knew the score. I agree with it. They knew the score. They weren't stupid. But they thought, well, we're going to fudge the historical sequence. They knew that. The historical sequence is fiscal union and then monetary union. They knew that they would do monetary union because the French wanted, and the Italians were sort of eager to unify. And the Bundesbank was just vehement, said, no, we don't want to do that way. Well, they shut down the Bundesbank, the view. The Bundesbank view is the historical view. Because they thought, well, we might have the time to put together a fiscal union, a political union, right after. We're going to gamble with that. But the trouble is, you don't write a constitution gambling. That's my problem. You just don't say, okay, we know the sequence is wrong, historically, but we're going to gamble and hope that the guys who write this treaty will be around to execute political union. Those guys were gone. Kohl was gone. And Kohl would have done it. Maybe even the Italians would have done it. But today's leaders have forgotten. So
you're saying,
if you read that stuff, it's boring, but every so often you got this idea that they knew. And these are memoranda from ministers of finance to another minister of finance, not just the peones.
So there was more, oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to interrupt that, but I just wanted to get my frog in the race.
Oh, I was just going to make a quick comment to say that the common conventional wisdom is, when I teach my European politics course, is that politics screws economics when you have these leaders trying to create the architecture, and they cut the corners in there. They were kind of blind, but what I hear from both of you is that they understood, or they read economics, they're advised more by Paul de Grau or these monetary people more than they're let on, and they had an idea how to get out of this, but they could not stay in place,
Or they were gone.
Or they were gone. Yeah.
They were
out
of business.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, it's hard to disagree with anything you guys said. All three of you guys have, I think, brought in elements that are really important. But my question is kind of, when you put it all together, where do you go with this? On one hand, it almost sounds like you might, and you may not be, because you didn't say it that way, but you might be advocating more fiscal unification. But given what Andreas said, I think one thing to think about is that with fiscal integration, now you've got these same people who can't get a banking supervision or anything done because of all the inter-country politics being in charge of the government, you know, so be careful what you wish for, because you may get Reed and Boehner people running Europe, and would they actually do any better than what's there? So one way is to go more that way. The other way, you know, everyone seems to say monetary union was a mistake. All right, well, monetary union is basically fixing exchange rates. If tomorrow you gave everyone back their currencies and didn't have the monetary union, you'd still have this big debt problem in Europe, and whether they're holding hands to fix the problem or they're not holding hands to fix the problem, it's still there, and it's still going to have repercussions across borders and so on. So I'm not sure what we're suggesting here. The analysis is great, but which way do we want to go?
But it's not in the list of questions that Tim said.
All right, I'll just come to the next
We're
one.
starting, you know, everybody's very cautious, not the word D as default. Very cautious, you know?
Yeah,
But it's a null hypothesis, damn it.
Yeah.
No inflation, zero growth, or virtually zero growth.
Yeah?
Interest rates relative to growth, you know, gap 4 or 5 percentage point. You tell me, he didn't want to say, I didn't want to say, but the null is D, as in default.
The null, in other words, this, you don't want to change anything, you want to leave it the way
No,
it
no,
is.
no, I mean, we're not saying because it's a different path, it's a different story, but I cannot see way out
Good, okay,
of
good.
our discussion, some degree of, you know, partial default. Or we change the central bank and say, okay, guys, we go for 10% inflation.
Well, you can get the world involved, so you can slow down the whole damn world instead of just
I
Europe.
know, I know. There are all sorts of bad scenarios, but I think, you know, if you look at the zero growth, low inflation,
A default is for me another form of debt restructuring. So either the Germans find a way to sell this politically. So the way I see is that the Germans start to say, oh, you have fixed your primary budget, I see you in the right move, moving in the right direction, you have done well, kid, now you get a haircut. The haircut will not, that is the positive
yeah,
scenario.
I call it default,
It's an organized, it can be, there's different levels of organized or not organized default, but the result is always that you need a debt cut.
it's still default.
You have to call it debt cut, call it default, it doesn't matter. That's a legal category, not an economic category in that sense. And this has to come, but may I say something here to what you have as Robert? I love what you said. I tell you a story. 1997, I'm invited at the National Congress of the Green Party to talk about 1997. I'm an old man. That's what my eye problem. I speak about the coming euro, right? And I talk about risk and about risk spreads that will hunt you if you are not careful with this. 1997 comes Joschka Fischer, sitting there. Joschka Fischer, later State Secretary of Germany, goes to the microphone and says, 40 years after Auschwitz, no German is allowed to talk against euro. And I was, what the heck? I was talking about the euro, and the guy talks about Auschwitz. But this is exactly this terrible link of the European idea with the European money. And this was a common phenomenon in Europe, where the elites were decoupling from their constituencies. Elites were falling away, which was not covered actually by the majority in Europe. You would never, if you made a voting in Germany, you would never have a referendum. You would never have a majority. You get the elites moving away. Now you have this nexus of European idea and monetary union, and that makes it so terrible. And it's a terrible day, I have to agree with Michele again. The problem is, what is France? When you look at the data, the country that really went south over the last 10 years is France. French data look terrible. So when you look at trade, when you look at productivity growth, when you look at the cost structure, when you look at the primary budget, terrible. So what is France? Is France southern? Is it part of the Club Med? Or is it the club of sin? That's why I'm pointing to Michele. Or is it more the club of virtue? I know I point towards my direction. So what is France, right? And then you would say economically, probably it belongs to the club of sin. Now I ask you, is it politically thinkable that Germany allows a drift away? Now I argue politically. Drift away from France? No way. Impossible. And this makes the problem so difficult.
Impossible because of the 2 world wars?
Yeah. Well, we had troubles with them
Yeah, well,
before
2
World
in the
Wars.
20th century.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go before.
Do you want to address any tough questions?
Just quickly, so I'm really sorry if I was not clear actually in my conclusion, but it is because I was just looking at the clock on the wall and I just wanted to finish shortly. So actually, I'm absolutely not against a transfer union. Okay, so let me clarify. Now, what I wanted to say is that right now we have 3 different views. It means that when we talk about solutions, we have to differentiate between short-term and long-term fixes, and that thanks very much for your comment, because basically your comment addressed basically this point. So as far as the short-term fixes are concerned, I think banking resolution and banking union is one of the, let's say, recipes. I can imagine that haircut is point number 2, is an option. Of course, we know that bailout has been allowed to happen already, so that was a kind of, that has been a kind of fixed session as well. And as far as long-term actually solutions are concerned, here I can imagine that some kind of fiscal union could be set up, but it needs political agreement first. So it doesn't, I mean, we can argue that, well, it would be nice to have a fiscal budget of, let's say, 2 to 20% on a central level, but first we need to have a political agreement. And right now I just don't see any chance actually to have this kind of political agreement, and not just because Germans do not agree, but I think even the Greeks would not be happy at all actually to centralize, to allow, let's say 20% of the taxes to centralize on the supranational level. So again, I'm not saying that I'm against the fiscal union. No, I'm actually in this sense a pro-European, let's say a pro-fiscal unionist. But my point is that right now transfer union is not the solution. And the reason why I was talking about this historical process was exactly this. I wanted to highlight that in Europe, the whole integration process actually happened from step to step. Never ever kind of real big quantum leaps have been initiated. And still after 50, 60 years, we are here. And I think in spite of the crisis, we can be absolutely satisfied and happy that this is a kind of solid and robust architecture. And accordingly, I'm not saying that fiscal union is not on the table, but right now it is a kind of, let's say, bailout fiscal union, centralizing not more than 1 to 2% of the GDPs, but not really a real transfer union. That is, it's about stabilization only and not redistribution. So that's my point.
But that segmentation is increasing. And if you look at even the fastest markets being financed, you find segmentations happening. Now you ask an Italian bank to borrow in the interbank market from Germany, you see what happens. You say, no, you go and borrow from your bank, central bank, you don't go to Germany. So essentially when you have a currency union and the interbank market is now functioning, you start wondering, yeah, it's the core. I mean, you would think that the Italian bank should be borrowing from a German bank, but now both the Bundesbank, it would be the Bundesbank to say, well, I don't know, the UniCredit branch in Frankfurt, I don't think is allowed to give money to UniCredit Milan. I mean, the Bundesbank is telling you that. So that worries me. Of course, hasn't happened, we don't have tariffs yet, but, you know, it's that. So I think I agree with you that Europe has done progressively, but this crisis of the last 2 or 3 years is a setback in the integration process.
I just real quickly, speaking to the point that you raised back there about responses, Ishvan, I thought you would maybe extrapolate from your presentation, you would say that it's misguided to think about this as a Euro crisis. What it really is some structural problems with the domestic economies living in different worlds. So I think from the American perspective, maybe we're, I guess, when we talk about solutions, you talk about transfer union, bank regulation, stuff like that. We're not, maybe the implication should be, all right, well, here's the recipe for reform if you fit in this category. Right, and Ireland is not Greece, and therefore we can't give common prescriptions to Ireland and to Greece, right?
Well, I'm even not saying that it's a kind of a la carte solution, so you can take whatever you want depending on which country you are. I'm just saying that political constraints are really massive, and possibly even more massive than economic ones. And this is what we have to somehow fix. How? Leadership is the solution. Right now, Europe doesn't have leadership. I mean, we have Angela Merkel in Germany, but after almost a year of elections, I just cannot see any positive step towards a so-called transfer union or whatever. So then what we are talking about, basically.
Travis?
So I was out in California a couple of weeks ago visiting some relatives, and we talked about this idea that has been put forward and is being argued now pretty vociferously, that California should split into somewhere between 2 and 5 different states. And it's because the Central Valley is incredibly weak economically, there's tremendous unemployment, there's a lot of transfer going on. So even if there's a transfer union, even if there's a way to fiscally balance across the system, there's always going to be political issues. And it seems that if you compare, as an American, if you compare how the U.S. banking system has worked versus how the European banking system has worked, the U.S. banking system has, of course, its own problems. But what I'm curious about is, in the U.S. we have dual banking system, state banks and federal banks. And it seems to move to ask Europe to move to a completely integrated banking system over what, I'm so glad that Istvan talked about this idea of process, that it's a process. You can't go from one step to another because of all the political problems that arise. If we ask Europe to go to a fully integrated banking system where all banks are treated the same, I just think it's not going to happen. So what if Europe considered something like somewhat of an equivalent of a U.S. system with state banks, national banks, and European zone banks, and force the banks to go in, and the banks that go into a European zone, and we know that most of them will, all the large ones will have to, they will be subject to much stricter
But
euro level.
isn't this what's happening? That banking union applies to 145 banks out of 8,000. I
Yes,
mean,
but I think
Germany
that-
said, oh, no, these outlanders banks, they don't have to be involved in the stress test. Germany already says, no, sir, these banks are not part of the process. It's the first one to say that.
Sure, but it sounds like you're linking this, it sounds like in a broader sense, we're linking this idea of fiscal transfer with a banking issue. I just don't see, because the banking issue, fiscal transfer typically happens in part because there are banking crises or banking weaknesses. That's when the emergency happens. All these crises, in the end, relate to a banking issue.
Well, what puts all these countries together, but at the journalistic level, it's called Basel III. The agreement on the voluntary agreement on regulation and supervision. And now, supposedly, in charge of this is not Eurozone, but it's the European Union. So it goes beyond the Eurozone. These are regulations issued by the Commission that apply to all countries of the European Union, not those to the Eurozone.
Right,
So
heavily
supposedly,
influenced by the United States, of course, because...
no, well, the US is already moving up. It's already ratcheting up a notch. But anyway, you have this Basel III, which are minimum levels, minimum. And the European Commission, has already issued various regulations that apply to all countries, all banks. So I think this 140 banks is the elite, which is going to be treated somewhat differently, not on the regulation, but on the supervision. That's the trick, it's the supervision. But when you talk to the national regulators, you say, well, we all talk to each other. We're going to apply pretty much the same rules. I don't know whether they believe the story they say, but that's how they put it together. We're going to apply to our country, our little banks, the same rules that other countries apply to the little banks. So there's got to be a uniformity, they say. The question is, will they actually do it? That's the big question. Not whether on paper the regulations of Italy is different from the regulation of France. It's not, that's not going to happen on paper.
Right, so like Tim, I think in terms of politics, I'd love to think in terms of economics. Theoretically, I do, and then reality hits, and I have to think in terms of politics. So politically, they're not going to do that. So if you force the banks to choose which system, or you tell the larger banks you will be under this system. And right now, I look at it and say that